If you are calling in and would like to comment on non-agenda items, please dial *9 and then *6 to unmute yourself. I will wait a few seconds.
Looks like we have one in-person speaker, Ms. Sherry Ming. Welcome.
Hello again. I was here a couple of weeks ago talking about short-term rentals. I consider myself a Sherry Menke, 1032 West Park Lane. I consider myself a small business owner, and I would like the city to recognize what I do and create a program for the already existing short-term rentals in the city. As I said, I employ 4 residents on a regular basis who live in the city of Santa Ana, and they depend on my on my payment every month. A housekeeper, a plumber, a gardener, a floor cleaner, and I would like to hire a handyman, but I haven't found one that I like. But visitors come from all over the world and bring revenue to the city with shopping, restaurants, etc. And a big thing that I've been hearing is how do the neighbors feel about short-term rentals? And so we canvassed 13 so far of the surrounding homes, including the 4 homes that we share a property line with. And all of them have signed this petition. We made it up. With their phone number, their address, saying that they are okay and support what we do at our house. And as I've been speaking with different neighbors, I found that there's another short-term rental on our block as well, who will be here on the 26th to speak. But I think there's a lot of people like myself and like this other gentleman who have been running these short-term rentals and have a residential rental license that used to be what was asked of us. And now all of a sudden we're all a little bit confused about what the city plans to do. My husband and I did meet with Jesse Lopez, and we put together a slideshow of a slide presentation. And unfortunately, I had issues with my printer, but if it's okay, I would like to send it via email. Either tonight or tomorrow, and it has a plan of how the city could go about creating a program and the benefits that it could bring to the city. So if you would please consider reading what my husband and I put together, and then we will be here on the 26th to talk about this subject. And we thank you as you consider what to do with short-term rentals in the future of Santa Ana. We hope that you will speak with us and take us into consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time out.
Excuse me, Chair. Ms. Menke, if you want to email everything that you want to send to our Planning Commission Secretary, we'll make sure we'll get to the Planning Commission.
Moving on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve item A, minutes from August 22nd, 2022, and item B, excused absences, if any?
Motion to approve item A, minutes from the meeting of August 22nd, 2022. You're going to do the excused absence together?
I don't think there was any absence.
All right, and excused absence recommended for Commissioners Thomas Morrissey and Commissioner
Calderon.
Calderon. Sorry. Yeah, Miguel Calderon.
I thought Tom was here, but he reclused himself. Yeah. Okay.
Or this
But he's-
week's.
But he's not here at the meeting, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
excused absence that we're establishing.
We have a motion from Commissioner McLaughlin and a second from Commissioner Alderete. Please call it.
Commissioner Alderete,
Yes.
Commissioner McLaughlin,
Aye.
Commissioner Ramos, Commissioner Wu,
Aye.
Chair Pham.
Aye.
Motion approved by majority vote with Commission members Morrissey, Commissioner Ramos, and Vice Chair Calderon absent.
Thank you. This concludes the consent calendar. Moving on to the work study session. The first,
Is Ramos is not absent though.
She had mentioned that she could be here for the start of the meeting and
Oh.
that she would be coming in at a later point into the meeting as well.
Okay. All right, thanks.
thank you. The first item on the work study calendar is the code updated regulations. Please note, no action will be taken on this item. Ricardo Soto will now provide a presentation on code updated regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This is the first of two study sessions tonight. This session is intended to address relatively minor code cleanups in the zoning code. The topics before you tonight are family daycare facilities, regional plan sign programs, short-term rentals, conditional use permit requirements for certain uses, retail uses in industrial zones, trash enclosure standards, definitions for certain uses, regulating noxious uses, electric fences, synthetic turf standards, and clarifying text edits. As with any zoning ordinance amendment, it will require recommendation of approval by this body to the City Council for adoption. The proposed updates stem from changes to state law and lessons learned and economic and community changes brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, the City Council adopted the general plan update April of this year. In that plan, there were a number of action items to address environmental justice through revising use and development standards in zoning code. Some of the items that will be discussed tonight will be the first of many code changes that will be brought before you to address EJ as well as other issues identified in the general plan. First item for discussion tonight is family daycare facilities. In 2020, a state law went into effect stating that large family daycare facilities that provide care for up to 14 children may not be subject to local land use requirements. The city may not require a business license or special permits to operate in residential neighborhoods. The code currently requires approval of a land use certificate for such a use, and the amendment would essentially remove that land use requirement for family daycare facilities. The second item is regional plan sign programs. Right now, the zoning code allows certain sites like regional auto dealerships, large cultural and commercial centers to apply for a package of flexible and creative signage called the regional sign program. The amendment would expand those opportunities to regional institutions such as hospitals or large schools or universities. And the individual applications for regional plan sign programs would continue to be brought before this body for review and action. Next item is short-term rentals. The zoning code is a permissive code, meaning it's written to explicitly list the permitted uses. Uses that are not listed as a permitted use are not allowed. Since the code does not explicitly list short-term rentals as a permitted use, they're not permitted. However, this has led to some confusion in the community as to whether they are permitted and has resulted in a number of short-term rentals operating within the city. The proposed amendment will explicitly state that they are prohibited. Next item is trash enclosures. Right now, the standards in the zoning code do not reflect requirements for recycling and organic waste adopted by the state, or in Chapter 16, garbage, trash, and weeds of the Santa Ana Municipal Code that was recently updated April of this year. The proposed amendment would bring the standards in the zoning code up to date with state law and make it consistent with Chapter 16 of the Municipal Code. Next topic is massage establishments. Over the past 20 years, there have been a number of state law changes related to how cities can regulate or not regulate massage establishments. In response to those various changes over the years to state law, the last amendment to the city's massage ordinance permitted them by right, provided they obtain a regulatory permit through the police department. Since then, we've seen an increase in the number of establishments in the city. And like what has been broadly documented, these establishments have proved to present opportunities for human trafficking and other types of illegal uses. So the proposed amendment would require a conditional use permit for massage establishments, allowing the city to more closely regulate them. Next topic is noxious uses. As was previously mentioned, there were a number of action items included in the general plan to address community concerns related to environmental pollution and proximity of certain industrial uses in relation to homes and parks. Currently, the zoning code does not have any specific requirements for uses that are required to obtain a permit from a regional, state, or federal agency to handle, store, emit, or discharge regulated chemicals. This amendment would be the first step taken in a number to follow to address community concerns related to pollution and EJ or environmental justice. And the amendment would require such uses that require a permit to obtain a conditional use permit when located within 500 feet of a sensitive land use. The next item relates to various definitions in the code. Currently, Chapter 41 does not include definitions for counseling service, medical office, or professional business administrative office. The lack of definitions for these uses has created some confusion in the business community as to what uses are permitted in what zoning districts. The proposed amendment would add definitions to for these three uses, as well as make clarifying edits to the various zoning districts where the uses are permitted. The next item relates to urban lot split and 2-unit development standards, or the local ordinance as it pertains to SB 9. The city amended Chapter 41 late last year in response to SB 9. The existing ordinance requires that at least 1 unit created under the ordinance be deed restricted as affordable, but does not specify to which level of affordability. The amendment would specify that rental products be deed restricted to very low and low, and that for sale products be restricted to moderate income households. Next topic relates to light processing facilities. The zoning code currently requires a CUP for light processing facilities in the M1 zoning district, but does not explicitly state that a CUP is required in another article, Article 14, recycling facilities, which also regulates the type of use. The proposed amendment would include text edits to Article 14 to make it consistent with the M1 district standards and explicitly state that a CUP is required for light processing. Next topic relates to electric fences. A recent state law adopted in 2021 gave local agencies the ability to permit or prohibit electric fences. Since then, the city has received a number of requests for electric fences. The amendment would permit these types of fences subject to a minor exception in industrial zones on properties that abut railroad rights of way to provide property and business owners another option to protect their property from theft and vandalism. Next topic relates to retail and industrial uses. Industrial zoning districts currently permit retail when they are ancillary to industrial uses and occupy no more than 5% of the tenant space, but do not permit retail as a primary use. The amendment would permit retail as a primary use in industrial zones where a property fronts an arterial street. The next topic is related to the retail and industrial zones, and it's a modification to the change of use parking exceptions currently in the code. Currently, the zoning code currently permits changes of certain uses within existing centers when the tenant space is 2,500 square feet or less. For example, if there is a retail use at a center that requires 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet, and that business is going to be replaced by a new restaurant, which requires 8 spaces per 1,000 square feet, they would be allowed to move forward without providing any additional parking spaces. This ordinance has allowed flexibility and facilitated the re-tenanting of a lot of commercial and professional centers by removing barriers related to parking to permit that change in use. The proposed amendment would extend that flexibility to facilitate the change of use in existing industrial centers that front arterial streets when a retail component is 50% or less the size of the tenant space. Lastly, synthetic turf standards. The city currently permits 50% of required yard to be covered by synthetic turf. The proposed amendment would permit greater use of synthetic turf to address the prolonged drought, as well as changes in landscape preferences. Adoption of the new ordinance would require filing of a notice of exemption pursuant to CEQA. And adoption is covered by the general rule that CEQA applies only to projects which have the potential for causing a significant effect on the environment. Where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question may have a significant effect on the environment, the activity is not subject to CEQA. Next steps for this is we plan on returning back to the Planning Commission September 26th with a draft ordinance for recommendation to the City Council. Following that date, the City Council would have to take action or approve the ordinance in 2 readings before it taking effect. That concludes the presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Ricardo. Does the commission have any question? Let's start with Commissioner Alderete.
I have no questions.
Commissioner McLaughlin.
I've got a couple of questions. The changes in these ordinances and such, does that mean that anything that has happened up to date is grandfathered, or how does that work from the standpoint? I mean, as an example, I'm going to use the last one you had up there, synthetic turf. I mean, there's properties around the city that exceed the 50%. Their whole front lawn is synthetic turf. So that would exceed the 50%. Does that mean that particular property would be grandfathered, or does that mean that they'd have to comply?
So currently, if the property has more than 50%, it would be non-conforming or essentially or illegal, done with not meeting today's code.
Right.
So if this were to be approved, adopted, then they would have to comply with whatever is in the.
So there would be code enforcement on something of that nature.
Potentially, if they don't comply with whatever is in the.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead.
If I can add to that, so what the proposal is to potentially allow for a greater percentage of usage of synthetic turf. So if they don't comply currently by exceeding the 50% with the proposed ordinance, they would be able to come in and apply to legalize it if they meet this.
Okay, so there is a way that the system be worked out between.
It gives the city an opportunity to really look at the current drought situation and how we manage water conservation, but still ensure that we have landscaping aesthetics that continue.
I mean, one of the things, I'm just going back on synthetic turf, one of the things that's wrong with, it's a challenge with synthetic turf is that in the weather like we've had for the last couple of weeks, the synthetic turf can be 125 to 150 degrees versus the actual temperature outside, and somebody walked on that and burns themselves. How does that play out?
I think that's something we can look into. Great question.
Yeah, curious about that. I've got a couple, can you go back to the first couple of slides?
Let me know which.
Yeah, the family daycare facilities. We're saying that they don't have to have a CUP if they stay within 8 to 14.
We're saying that currently we require a land use certificate when they're between 8 and 14. And moving forward, when they're between 8 and 14, they won't require anything.
They won't
We will
require
not
anything.
require anything. We cannot require any land use certificates for daycare facilities going.
So where does the daycare facility get monitored?
The state has a department organization that reviews and processes applications for them. In addition to that, they are required to work with the local fire agency. But the city would not require any.
So the city's not, I mean, from what you just said, the city's not involved in the process.
Exactly, so it would be essentially just removing the city from that process and then working directly with the state fire authority.
Interesting.
That's been the problem for a long time. I was on a childcare task force with United Way, and we studied that situation, and they had all these conflicting from a planning commission, though. you're trying to be more consistent with current state laws, right?
That's correct.
Which is removing our authority in that area to regulate health and safety because it's a state responsibility or county responsibility. So, yeah, Mark, that becomes a problem in our local city.
Can I go back to?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's all right. No, don't jump in, Alan, anytime. But with regards to the RSPG applications. Now, we're broadening that a little bit from the standpoint of what it is today to include, and like I said, you've got hospitals and educational facilities and things like that. So, I mean, that's good. It's very good. Is there anything that isn't in that ordinance that we should have or we've overlooked or anything of that nature? Because you look at the signage, if you look at the hospitals like Chalk and St. Joseph's and Providence over in Orange, they've got huge signs right on the highway, which would have been against Caltrans in the past. So has this gone through Caltrans too?
This does not require Caltrans approval because it is not a sign that's subject to Caltrans regulations unless they're adjacent right next to the freeway and they act as advertising sign. These type of sign in terms of the on-site sign program, as long as they advertise on-site activities, are not subject to Caltrans approval.
In other words, it's not a third party advertisement.
Correct.
It's the owner of whoever's occupying the,
That is exactly right.
okay. Good. This one's good. Okay, Alan.
Commissioner
I
Wood.
want to thank staff for putting this presentation together as a study session. As I take it, you're working on the updates and the amendments, and they do not go into effect until they are actually written and will be presented at later dates. And you're just gathering informal input now. We'll have other chances to go over once the language is developed.
So the language is in draft form now. We are planning on coming back to this body on the 26th to present the draft. So at that point, you will have an opportunity to review the draft language and provide any additional
And I
comments.
thank staff because these issues have come up at various commission meetings. So I thank you. I'd like to clarify 2 points. One is on the massage. Can you go back to that slide? The massage thing, is there a distinction between what type of massage from those that are also done as the therapeutic and health related to acupuncture and herbal medicine from Asian doctors that use that holistic treatment?
If the use is like classified as a medical use or like a chiropractor, they would be categorized as a different use and not a massage establishment.
Yeah, but massage sometimes is applied to it as you're doing the heating. Especially if you're practicing Kung Fu and you're getting bone hurts and things like that. But it's a thing from Russian to Czechoslovakian and Swedish massage and fool around massage, so. Sorry, man. But I just was, wondering if the language is going to be succinct from that. If I read that, you're going to modify it to require conditional use on massage. So if the business mission is massage only, which either has the entertainment value or whatever, the CUBC will govern that. If they apply for a license applying as a acupuncture, tea and herbal, like the traditional thing we have in our community, that doesn't fall under that condition use payment, but may fall under some other ones.
It may fall into a medical office use. We'd have to look at how the business operation specifically, if it falls into massage category or medical use. If it falls into massage establishment, then they would be subject to these requirements.
My concern is again, because Western way of looking at it, as we saw in Atlanta, is sometimes, it's not consistent with the way we treat it in the Asian culture. So I just want to make you aware of that and to be sensitive to that. That's all. Then the other thing is on the professional usage. Can we go back to that slide?
Sorry, which?
Yeah, right there. So basically, we're talking about counseling, medical, and professional. You're going to update that usage to allow for more permitted uses, right?
No, this relates to just providing definitions for each of these uses.
Okay,
And there are various zoning districts that allow them, but they use inconsistent terminology. So for instance, let's just use C1, for example, may state professional office is a permitted use. And then the C2 may say professional and an administrative office is a permitted use. And then the professional zone may just say administrative office permitted use, which all those are supposed to be referencing the same type of use. So what this is going to do is just create a uniform definition and use of terminology throughout all the zoning districts where that use is intended.
and we just recently gave a conditional use permit to a church where a significant portion of that usage is office space or things that are non-related to what we normally think is related to a church. And I don't know what percentage, but it looked like 46%. So we couldn't question what kind of activity would take place there. So I just was wondering, when we start looking at the professional administrative office use, how we will, are we gonna be clear on a definition or what?
Yes, the proposed
Okay.
amendments would include both a definition for each of these uses as well as the various zoning district amendments.
So similar to
Consistent
Mark's question, once you do the amendment and we approve it, will that also be retro? That we could go revisit certain conditional use permit?
This is not going to affect any of the prior uses that were permitted because this isn't changing what uses are permitted in the zoning districts. It's just clarifying and using the same term throughout.
Okay, and then the one on the short-term rental, the recommendation or the one that you are working on is that that they will be prohibited citywide.
They're currently prohibited citywide. The code amendment would just clarify that.
Clarify what the existing, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wu. For my clarification, all these amendments will be rolled into one ordinance. Is that correct? And then that's
Yes.
what we're reading, what the council will be reading for later on.
Correct.
And then on the matter of the CUP for the massage parlors, will the CUP, does it belong to the tenant or does it belong to the physical property?
Similar to other conditional use permits, it would be tied to the land. So if one business leaves the location, another one would be able to locate there and continue the use.
Perpetuity? I'm not
Yeah,
familiar.
until there's like a lapse in that use there.
And then for the SB9 lot split, there's a mention of deed restriction for low income rental or if for sale product. How do we foresee enforcing that deed restriction?
So the code amendment will also include language that the developer work with the city's housing agency to similar to other projects processed under the hood.
And I'm curious about the industrial and retail split. How I imagine when you were describing it would be, we have an industrial space that potentially a portion of it can be used as a retail. And then whatever zoning standards apply to retail would apply to that portion of the space. Would that be just for retail use for that tenant? Or does it potentially, that space be able to be subleased to a different tenant within that space?
I'm not really clear on the question. You're saying if a tenant comes in and wants to use a portion of it for retail,
Right, but it's
if
not,
standards that apply to it would also be applied to the site? Is that what you're saying, or?
how I understood it would be, was that there's a tenant that's using that industrial space and they have an operation that's retail related. And so they're able to use that, a portion of that space as retail. My question is there, am I understanding it correctly if that's the case, or is it the case that a tenant or an owner of an industrial space is able to split a portion of their industrially zoned, land use and then sublease a portion of that space to a different tenant that does retail work or, is involved in retail?
There are opportunities for subleasing, but it would be the primary tenant that's leasing the space. They would have to have both of those uses. Sublease, like if they want to have a portion of it utilized by someone else, but there are some limits on the number of subleases. I believe it's just one.
Okay. Because it seems to me like the two amendments, the parking reduction for retail space and retail, the ability to use a portion of the industrial space as retail, they seem to kind of.
Or you could look at it like a Rickenbacker guitar. They manufacture guitars there and they have a sales office, but they have a retail office too. They're a small one. And then the same thing with Suavecito, the pomade thing in Santa Ana.
I think that's what I would be imagining.
But there are other things like cannabis places that are retail within industrial zones,
Because I know that the industrial parking requirement is less restricted than retail. I'm just concerned if there is a industrial use, but portion of that space is for something that's more intense, not related to that industrial use, maybe like a clothing or some sort of retail activity. And so you're kind of increasing the occupant load and then the parking demand on that lot when traditionally that lot would only account for the industrial use parking.
Yeah, I think the intent of this is really to address that specifically, but to allow it with an understanding that there may be some additional parking required there. So there's a cap built in that once it surpasses that, the site or the tenant space would be required to provide what is required by code. But by allowing this exception, we're allowing that flexibility or that to allow that type of change in use versus this being strictly being a barrier that wouldn't permit a lot of those existing industrial spaces have been built to some of those parking standards that you mentioned from changing or transitioning to allow retail uses.
Okay. In essence, we're somewhat rezoning that district without actually rezoning it for retail use in essence.
It wouldn't be rezoning, it would just be allowing it as a use.
Okay.
So those would continue to be industrial zoning districts that still allow all the industrial uses that are regulated by all the sections in the code that regulate industrial uses, but this would just be added use that can happen on these properties.
That's it for me. Thank you. Is there any other comments? No. Okay. Madam Secretary, have we received any written communication or is there a member of the public that would like to comment on the item?
We have not received written communication. Also, for the record, Commissioner Ramos returned at 6:09 PM.
Thank you.
If you're attending this meeting in person and would like to comment on this item, please fill out a request to speak form and turn it into the secretary. If you are participating via Zoom and would like to comment on this item, please select the hand icon and unmute yourself. If you are calling in and would like to comment on this item, please dial *9 and then *6 to unmute yourself. I will wait a few seconds.
Okay,
Chair, we do not have any speakers.
thank you.
Chair, this is not a public hearing item. It's really a workshop.
Mhm.
So any opportunity to speak would have been done at the public comment where a member of the public can speak on any item on the agenda and as well as non-agendized. But you were able to speak in regards to the short-term rental. So
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the second item of the work study calendar. It's for updating on the housing legislation. Please note, no action will be taken on this item. Fabiola Laker will now provide a presentation on the update on the housing legislation.
Evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. Former Chair Morrissey had requested a kind of a study session to bring the commission up to date with the changes in state law related to housing. There has been quite a bit that has happened in the past few years. And so the most notable were chosen for this study session tonight. And it's just to bring you up to speed to what has taken place. There is no action, no code amendments that are required as a result of these updates. So the first one was back in 2018, SB 167, AB 678, and AB 1515. These three bills were passed. And basically, it was to strengthen the Housing Accountability Act. The Housing Accountability Act is not a new law, has been on the books for about 40 years, but in the recent years has taken a lot of novelty or notoriety because of the strengths and the different bills that have been passed. So it basically stated that it's applicable to all housing projects, not just affordable projects. SB 2753 requires that density bonus application be expedited, and certain concessions, be applied, and especially to affordable housing. So it includes also the waivers to parking, which you see a lot coming forward from projects that have been processed by the city. A lot of the concessions are related to parking and some of them to open space. AB 3194 made 3 important revisions to the Housing Accountability Act, and which you will be hearing quite a bit tonight. There has been numerous changes made. So basically, it limits government's authority to reject or restrict housing development that comply with objective general plan zoning. So basically, what it does is whatever requirements the city has, it holds local agencies accountable for that. So basically, we have to honor what we have on the plans. So if a zoning is inconsistent with a general plan, so the general plan will be applicable, and the city must process whatever projects are submitted that are consistent with a general plan. And so also it does not allow the city to do any changes that will affect any type of density, reducing the number of units that are allowed. And the only way that a project could be denied is if there's a finding that could be made that the project will have an adverse impact on public safety, public health and safety, and that's a really high threshold to meet. AB 2263 basically authorized parking reductions for historical buildings that could be reused or where adaptive reuse could be done. If it's a residential project within half a mile of a major transit stop, an agency cannot require parking spaces more than what it existed. For a project converting into non-residential use, at least a 25% reduction will be allowed. The city of Santa Ana has an ordinance that allows adaptive reuse. This was adopted in 2019. The city was ahead of its time because the ordinance was adopted back in 2014. And so definitely the city saw an opportunity to use the historical resources and to repurpose them for different uses. And at the same time to preserve those historical resources. SB 1227 extend the state density bonus law to also apply to student housing. SB 1333 basically specifies that charter cities are subject to a lot of the legislation that was being passed. A lot of times charter cities were exempt and it was applicable only to general law cities. Santa Ana is a charter city. As such, those laws will be applicable. SB 330 also has been a very notable piece of legislation. Basically, what it does is allows for housing projects to be submitted with a preliminary application. And what it does is very little information is submitted, such as what the density of the project is, where the project is located, whether it's located within, fire hazard area. And the city has to basically review that application. If it's deemed complete, the applicant has about 180 days to submit a formal application for review. The city can only review those that project, applying objective standards such as not just what the zoning code requires, but any architectural or design standards that the city has. AB 1851 prohibits local agency from requiring replacement of religious use parking spaces when a faith-based institution wants to do affordable housing in their parking lot. So up to 50% of the number of parking spaces can be eliminated, and also prohibits a local agency from requiring to comply with the parking standards that will be required if the zoning code is applied for the religious use. AB 1851. So it's again, it's affiliated with the housing development project. So and again, it only requires up to one parking space per unit can be required. AB 3182 prohibits homeowners association from banning renters. If you recall, initially when ADUs were approved, it was there were a lot of concerns or ambiguity whether homeowners associations can ban ADUs and whether they could be rented. So this clarifies that it could be rented and that cannot restrict to less than 25% of the homes or ADUs to be rented. And if a homeowner builds an ADU that lives within homeowners association and they rent that ADU, that is not considered to be a renter occupied, but rather a homeowner occupied. SB 8 basically extend Senate Bill 330, which we kind of talked a little bit before. So SB 330 had a sunset of 2025. This extends it to, it will extend that to 2030. It will still continue to require for projects to be streamlined and expedited. It's still and amidst, again, the Housing Accountability Act included some definitions that also says the housing projects or housing development also includes emergency shelters and farm worker housing. And they are to be allowed ministerially. Again, doesn't allow for densities to be minimized and focus primarily in allowing lower income households and accommodate 100% affordable projects. So also clarifies the conversion of low income housing to supportive housing or assisted living. So before you only require residential units, residential projects, mixed use projects, as well as the mixed use projects that dedicated 2/3 of the floor area to housing. So as you can see, there's a lot more uses that has been included as part of SB 8. And also doesn't allow for those cities or local agencies that have growth management plans to be implemented during this period of time. SB 9, we actually had a presentation before. The city has adopted an ordinance to implement SB 9. Ricardo also covered a little bit on SB 9 and some of the changes that are going to be made that are going to be coming to the Planning Commission. So basically this promotes small scale neighborhood residential development. It allows for 2 units to be built where 1 existing dwelling unit exists without having to ministerially. It also allows for an urban split, which basically a lot that has a minimum size of 2,400 square feet can be built, can be subdivided. Minimum lot size is 1,200 square feet. Existing resident cannot be demolished more than 25%, has to not have been rented in the last 3 years. It requires the property owner to live on site. It cannot be within a historic property or historic neighborhood. There are certain conditions that can be placed on the map if somebody chooses to do a subdivision, such as easement for public services. Parcels must have access or provide access to the right of way, and a minimum of 1 off-street parking space must be provided for each unit. There are things that are not allowed, such as dedication of right of way and construction of off-site improvements for newly created parcels, as that basically increases the cost of subdivision. The minimum lot size, minimum unit size is 800 square feet. Minimum rear and side yard setback is 4 feet. Again, parking is 1 space per unit. Cannot be rented for less than 30 days. And again, subdivided must occupy the site for at least 3 years. And the only way that this could be denied is, again, that finding that it's a life safety hazard, which is a very high threshold to meet. SB 10 is a voluntary for cities. The cities don't have to adopt an ordinance, at least for now. It allows cities to adopt an ordinance where up to 10 units can be allowed in a single family residential zone or parcel within transit-rich areas, which means where public transportation is available. As an urban infill site, it cannot be done in certain areas such as fire hazard severity zones, which the city of Santa Ana doesn't have any. If subject to a voter approved restriction designating open space or park or recreation purposes. Any of these ordinance that the cities decide to adopt is exempt from CEQA. SB 634 expands density bonus law, which allows for affordability period longer than 55 years for any unit. SB 591 establishes intergenerational affordable housing development that includes 80% senior citizens along with 20% caregivers and transition. In 2021, AB 345 requires local government to approve accessory dwelling units to be sold separately from the primary residence to allow for affordable housing organizations to create ownership units for low-income families. So this is only a condition that could be done if it's done by a qualified nonprofit organizations, and it has to be sold to low-income person and has an enforceable covenant use restriction, and property is in a recorded tenancy in common agreement. So there is some pending legislation that has cleared the Senate. It's heading to the governor's desk for signature. One of the Senate bills is Senate Bill 6 that would allow residential development on properties that are zoned for retail and office space without needing a rezoning, and allow project applicants to invoke the Housing Accountability Act, which limits the discretion to deny. It should say condition approval. I apologize for that. So it is exempt from discretionary review, not exempt from discretionary review. The cities can still review and the application to CEQA, inclusionary housing ordinance would apply, and has a requirement that has to pay applicants in developer must pay prevailing wages and for skilled and trained workforce, and must comply with all local agencies, zoning, parking, design, and other applicable ordinances. A proposed mixed-use project must provide at least 50% of the square footage dedicated to residential use. AB 2011 is kind of like the sister of SB 6, but this is more for affordable housing, and it requires to pay prevailing wages to construction workers again, meet specified below market rate, affordable housing targets. The only exceptions to AB 2011 for paying skilled labor and prevailing wages if the project is less than 10 units, and all objective standards are applicable. And lastly, AB 2097 will prohibit a public agency from imposing any minimum automobile parking requirements on any residential, commercial, or other development project that is located within half-mile transit. So those are, that's what's actually in store right now. The last three bills are waiting. There are in the governor's desk. They have been approved by the Senate. And that concludes my presentation. Have any questions?
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions? Commissioner already.
I have no questions.
Thank you. Commissioner McLaughlin.
I guess the one overall theme that comes up here in my book is that it says that for one unit, whatever that unit is, you need one parking space. I mean, how can we continue to implement these dictated requirements and then on the other hand, ignore the fact that we have a parking problem in the city? I mean, mass transit is not the answer, because mass transit is not, that's not working.
Right. I don't disagree. I think that the legislation is not really, the way that they pass laws is one size fits all. And they don't necessarily look at the conditions at one particular community. And the whole idea is to change, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and by passing laws that reduces the number of parking spaces. Plus, advocacy groups for housing have expressed that building parking spaces makes projects extremely expensive, and that a lot of land is dedicated to parking that could be used for housing.
So we don't know.
Well,
I think what Fab Bill is delicately saying is that
I know there's a dance in that.
the state is essentially taking away local control and requirements when it comes to housing.
And I'm sorry, this will last until 2035.
Some of it ongoing, but you're right, much of it has at least a proposed sunset date of 2035.
Yeah. Thank you for educating us.
Lachlan, do you have any additional comments?
Am I correct that there was one item up there under one of the bills that said you could have upwards of 10 units on the property?
Yeah, that is correct. That Senate Bill 10, it is not required for cities to implement that. It's voluntary if cities want to adopt an ordinance. So at this point has not been required, it's not mandated by state, it's voluntary.
So what's the number of different properties you can have on the land right now?
What's the number of units that you can have right now?
Maximum number of units that you can have.
Well, I think the one that will yield the most, it will be under SB 9, which would allow you to do a 2-unit development plus 1 accessory dwelling unit, which will yield 2, or you can have split the lot into 2,
Right?
create 2 parcels, have a primary dwelling unit and an accessory dwelling unit, which will yield to 4 in each residential parcel that you have.
And how many parking spaces?
1 minimum parking space. 1 parking space will be.
So four houses or 4 dwellings and 1 parking space.
Per
Correct.
unit, right?
And for the accessory dwelling unit, you may not require a parking space.
Right.
Alan, do you have any?
So if I own your property, could you have more land than I do? And I subdivide the heck out of it, and because I can, then I sell it off and move to Maine, where I could get 100 acres or so. I make off the property, right? And that's allowable. Because it doesn't say that you have to stay there and you have to keep it, right?
Yeah, you have to live there for a minimum of 3 years before you can take off.
Those 3 years, it's nothing because it'll take that long to do the development. My point here is though, we're treating housing as as or it has been in California as a speculative market. But the more speculative market, we're defeating the affordability to working folks. And I think that again, we're which is nothing we could do because it's not being addressed. We tried to do affordable housing, but the method we use does not put affordable housing into the working housing that is really needed. So I don't know how we do that when it's taken out of our hand. I guess when you see these applications, hopefully we got good developers that want to do the right thing, and we sometimes do.
Yeah, one of the reasons why sometimes developers don't go to the very bare minimum of required parking spaces is a lot has to do with lending. A lot of times, institutions will not lend to you if you don't have enough what they consider adequate parking, because what they want is a successful project. So they will not lend you if they don't believe that the project is adequate to be successful.
Well,
So a lot
do
of
you-
it is dictated also right now by the market.
Thank you.
Just one question. I think the number, if I do it this way, I think the number is actually 6 dwelling units per property, because can't I have a JADU in my main home?
Yes, you can, but it is a habitable space that you can rent out, but it's really not a separate unit. But yes, you're absolutely right.
So it'd be 6. I mean, it's not recognized, but it is recognized because you can do it and you can
Yes.
have a JADU.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, it's
So you
not a
got
separate unit,
6 properties.
but 3 households, if that's what you're
Well, yeah,
referring
3
to.
households, but you got 6 properties that are potentially could be rented out to individuals.
Correct, yes.
Since the first of the year when we introduced the SB9 ordinance, how many application do we know in total has gone through the city?
I don't know, in the city of Santa Ana, we have not processed one yet. We
One-
have had a lot of inquiries, but
For the SB9 lot split?
Oh, SBI, no, that's, okay. Yeah,
lots
yeah.
of inquiries though.
Because to me, a lot of these Senate bills and Assembly bills, they seem to be targeting cities. I would assume like Los Angeles or San Francisco, where the you know, the density and the lack of parking is pretty heavy. I'm wondering how much it would impact Santa Ana. Do we foresee it impacting Santa Ana that much? Because like you said, it's a one size fit all bill. My feeling is it's usually aimed at more higher density cities. Not to say that Santa Ana isn't a high density city, but I'm imagining a developer wanting to develop in Los Angeles or San Francisco where they wouldn't meet the parking requirement in such a small lot, and the ability to increase the unit count and reduce the parking count makes sense. That's the reason why I asked what the SB9 is. Seems like a lot of people would jump at developing, but I'm curious to see how many people actually do. Yeah.
According to Tenor Center, their study showed that it was going to yield about 5% of all the qualifying parcels to be developed in the state of California. So it's really not a large number. But based on the study, I suspect there's going to be more legislation being crafted.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like how much all of this would impact us specifically as a city. Whether or not, let's say, the bills you mentioned get approved. If we had a flood of developers wanting to develop every retail space into residential or not, or if it's just a byproduct of legislation that's aimed at more specific cities, not really us. Curious. Yeah.
I think while it's not aimed at us, it will impact us.
Additional comments?
Chair, Commissioner Ramos has her hand up.
Commissioner Ramos?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for the summary of all of the recent legislation. And I had a question on one of the bills. I don't remember the number, whether it was AB or SB, but it seemed to be limiting the discretionary power that HOAs have. So I just want to make sure I understood correctly. One of them said that they can place limits on how many of the units can be renter occupied. And I also understood that they cannot limit the renting of ADUs or junior ADUs. So I know recently when we've had projects come to us, developers have said that those developments that include garages, that in their CCNRs, it will state that the garages cannot be converted to ADUs and cannot be rented out. So I was just wondering if staff knows how what that would look like moving forward. Will CCNRs be able to limit the conversion of garages into ADUs? Or will that law not allow them to do that? I don't know if you've all thought of that.
Yeah, there's another Senate bill, and I don't recall the number, that actually it's unclear whether CCNRs can actually prohibit the conversion of garages into ADU. However, or even construct ADUs, but I believe that it's kind of have been left to, each HOA to resolve that issue. Per state law, the way we enforce it is if it's a parcel and it's allowed under state law, we're going to approve it. It's up to HOA to take action. That is the city's position. The AB that you're referring to is AB 3182, where it says if an ADU is built on a HOA community, they have restrictions apparently that doesn't allow for units to be rented out. So basically what this is saying is within that community, at least you need to allow at least 25% of those units to be rented. And it also states that if you build an ADU and you live in the primary on site, whether it's the ADU or on the primary residence, that doesn't count towards that 25% because it's it's considered to be homeowner occupied if you live on site in one of the units.
Thank you for that, Fabiola. I think it's still a little, I don't think it's fully clear to me yet. So I would just like to ask staff that whenever we have projects come to us for consideration that would have an HOA and that have garages that could potentially be converted into ADUs, that we just be reminded of this legislation or the various legislations that kind of oversee and be reminded of the city's interpretation of that legislation, just to ensure that we as commissioners don't ask questions or make recommendations to the HOA if it's not something that would be legal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any additional comments, Commissioner?
I got a question here. So let's go back to this comment was to make a garage into a living dwelling. Now, if in fact the garage represents the parking that is allocated to that, and they decide to convert the garage to an ADU, where does the parking come into play at this point in time? So there's no parking?
It could be uncovered parking. Could be uncovered, could be just.
Like uncovered?
Yes, could be on the driveway, on the side of the house.
Okay.
Parking if there's any.
Yeah, if there's any, right? I'm good.
It sounds like it all comes down to parking. Always. Okay. Madam Secretary, have we received any written communication? Or is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item?
We have not received written communication.
Thank you. And that concludes the work study calendar. Moving on to comments. Is there any comment from staff?
I do have our principal planner, Ali, to provide you with an update regarding an award on a project that we recently completed.
Thanks, Chairman, and good evening, members of the commission. At the request of Commissioner Wu, who was attending the 2022 Affordable Housing Awards hosted by the Kennedy Commission, we just want to recognize that one of the projects that this commission helped facilitate, the La Placita Cinco project on Fifth Street. Kelly, there's 2 awards in there. There you go. That one was recognized again. It's won awards by the Orange County APA. And it's won awards from the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and was most recently awarded recognition from the 2022 Affordable Housing Award. So we just want to share with you, the project's now been nominated for a state award, and if it is successful at the annual conference for American Planning Association in Anaheim this fall, then we'll nominate it for national recognition as well. So thanks for your support. Thanks for council's support. And yeah, if you want to touch the prizes and all that, feel free to do so.
I was actually invited to be there as one of the early people involved with the affordable housing unit when there were just 4 people sitting around a room looking at what to do about redlining. And to see a new generation of planners working with developers and bankers is really refreshing. And when the developer for La Placita Cinco got up, he summed up what I thought a great way for planning commissions and the planning department to work. First, he recognized the residents in the room, which my wife is the president of the Artish Neighborhood Association, and several residents there who got their jobs in housing programs as a result of the affordable housing program the city embraces. Number 2, then he talked about the role of staff and how they were helpful. And then they also talk about the lending aspect. And you have something that works very well in Santa Ana in terms of affordability. They filled all the units over at La Placita Cinco. They only have 1 unit because someone recently moved out. But if you go by there, you notice that the tenants are the kind of tenants, working people from the neighborhood that you want to see there. So from that standpoint, when Ali got up there to represent the city, I was just overwhelmed. And I just want Executive Director, and it reflects on all the staff to work together on that, and you as our leader as well. It's a very good project, and I hope we have more of that, and I hope that developer does more too.
Thank you for those kind words.
Congratulations.
Thank you. One more quick update, as Ali mentioned, that this upcoming fall, there will be an annual conference from the American Planning Association California chapter. It's not often that we have those type of conference near us. This year will be Anaheim, just north of us here. We'll send out some information to the commissioners. If any of you would like to attend the conference, please let us know, and we can help coordinate the attendance to the conference if you'd like.
Is that different from the Cal Cities one? Okay.
It is. This one's specifically for planning, land use planner, but they will often have tracks for planning commissioners as well.
And I received an email for call for submission of topics for the Cal City ones. And I guess I'll give you a call for some ideas that I have. One I like is commission boundaries, which I might seem argumentative, but as I told Ali, I respect staff and some the way you guide us through it. So, you know, I always respect your guidance. I'm just pontificating on the issue on behalf of the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none. Okay. We'll adjourn. For the next regular meeting will be held on Monday, September 26, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. at City Hall. Thank you.